All right, let's just dive right into it. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're unpacking a really fascinating piece of source material that tackles something almost every single one of us can relate to, the traditional American dream. You know the exact path I'm talking about, right? Society tells us to get a solid college degree, land a secure 9-to-5 job, buy a nice house out in the suburbs with a 30-year mortgage, faithfully max out that 401k, and just squirrel away whatever pennies are left over. And maybe you execute this plan flawlessly. By all traditional metrics, you're doing everything exactly right. But the text we're looking at today poses a very uncomfortable question about this perfectly executed plan, exploring why it still leaves millions of people feeling completely financially exhausted. Seriously, if you're playing by all the rules, why do you still feel broke? According to our source, despite getting those regular promotions and working crazy overtime, a massive portion of the population feels like they're permanently on the edge. They feel like they are just one medical emergency, one unexpected car transmission blowing up, or just one bad month away from total financial ruin. Well, our explainer today is going to break down exactly why this feeling is so incredibly common and why the author argues it's actually by design. So the source material's core premise here is actually pretty simple. The rules of money, they changed decades ago, but most people are still playing by a totally outdated rulebook. The author argues that Wall Street, big banks, and the traditional education system have essentially engineered what they call a middle-class trap. By following these old rules in a brand new reality, the middle class is unknowingly participating in habits that keep them working endlessly, rather than actually building real wealth. To understand how this works, the source exposes three major financial lies. Let's get right into the specifics. Lie number 1, the primary home trap. To make sense of this, we have to look at how the author redefines two fundamental financial terms. Since childhood, we're told that renting is basically just throwing money away, right? But the wealthy, the top 1%, they define an asset entirely differently. According to the text, a true asset is something that puts money into your pocket every single month, regardless of whether you're actively working or not. A liability, on the other hand, violently takes money out of your pocket. You really have to keep this strict definition in mind as we look at the reality of homeownership. Okay, let's actually do the math the author presents here because it's wild. When you buy a single-family home for yourself, you're dropping a massive down payment followed by a 30-year mortgage. If you buy a median-priced $400,000 house here in the U.S. at, say, a 7% interest rate, you are definitely not just paying $400,000. Over the lifespan of that 30-year loan, you will end up paying the bank close to $950,000. The source points out that for the first 10 years, your payments are going almost entirely to the bank's interest. You're essentially just renting that money from the bank. And you know, the financial bleeding doesn't stop at the mortgage, not even close. You've got property taxes that magically seem to increase every single year, homeowners insurance, HOA fees, and of course, the absolute joy of a suddenly broken HVAC system in the dead of winter. Every single month, without fail, this house pulls money directly out of your bank account. So by the author's strict definition we just talked about, this makes your primary residence a massive liability, not an asset. To put that into perspective, the author notes that the middle class often ties up like 80% of their entire net worth in the literal house they sleep in. That leaves them totally house poor and unable to invest anywhere else. The wealthy, however, view their primary residence as a luxury, not a primary investment. When they want an investment, they buy cash-flowing real estate like multifamily apartment buildings or commercial properties. They buy places where other people pay their rent, cover the mortgage, and ultimately generate a real profit for the owner. Moving right along, lie number 2, the savings and 401k myth. The source argues that the classic advice to just park your cash in a savings account and a 401k for 40 years, well, that was fantastic advice back in 1975 when banks actually paid decent interest and the dollar held its value. But today, the reality is entirely different. The average savings account pays practically zero. Meanwhile, real inflation, the actual rising cost of your groceries, your gas, housing, healthcare, is constantly draining your purchasing power. The text claims that if your money is just sitting in a traditional bank, it is mathematically guaranteed to lose value every single day as the Federal Reserve prints more money. But here's the really hidden danger in the supposed holy grail of middle-class wealth, the 401k. It all comes down to mutual fund fees. A 1 or 2% management fee? I mean, that sounds incredibly tiny on paper, right? But over a 30-year period, those seemingly small fees can devour up to a third, literally nearly 33% of your total returns. Wall Street fund managers are getting rich off your capital regardless of whether the market goes up or down, while you, the worker, are shouldering 100% of the financial risk. According to the text, the top 1% absolutely refuse to just hand their money over to fund managers and, cross their fingers for 4 decades. No way. They demand control over their money. They invest in assets they can touch, leverage, and actively manage themselves. We're talking about private businesses, real estate, and direct equity. The offer argues that blindly trusting a 401k and a basic savings account is just a recipe for working until you're 70, only to discover your nest egg buys half of what it used to. Which brings us to our third major point. Lie number 3, the FICO score obsession. The author aggressively redefines what this whole 3-digit number actually means. Society conditions us to brag about an 800 FICO score as if it's the absolute ultimate measure of financial success. But the source asks a really vital question. What does it actually measure? It definitely doesn't measure your wealth, your net worth, your income, or your financial freedom. Actually, the text bluntly calls it an I love debt score. It strictly measures how profitable you are to the banking system. And here is how that system plays out in reality. The financial system pushes the middle class to be hyper-focused on their credit score, so they feel super confident taking out loans for depreciating liabilities. Think of financing a $60,000 truck that loses 20% of its value the second its tires hit the street outside the dealership, or financing furniture and racking up credit card points. Conversely, the wealthy don't see debt as evil, they see it as a tool. But they use debt as leverage to borrow money and buy an asset that pays for the debt itself, leaving them with a profit. If you're meticulously managing your credit score just to get a slightly better interest rate on a consumer loan you probably shouldn't be taking anyway, the text argues you are firmly caught in the trap. Okay, let's wrap this all together. Section 4, breaking the chains. So the absolute crucial point the author wants to leave you with here is that the financial system isn't broken. Actually, scratch that. It's doing exactly what it was meticulously designed to do. It's built to keep the middle class working for a paycheck, tying up all their liquidity in a house, letting inflation eat their savings, and keeping them permanently trapped in consumer debt. To make the necessary paradigm shift, the text says you have to stop treating your primary home as your only retirement plan, stop letting money just evaporate in a savings account, and stop worshiping a FICO score just to buy things you don't need. You've got to shift to the breakout path, acquiring true cash-flowing assets, leveraging debt smartly, and actually taking control of your investments. And this brings us to a dickly provocative question directly from our source material. Are you building wealth, or are you just feeding the system? The author's whole goal here is to give you the raw truth so you can stop simply surviving and start actually building. I highly encourage you to take a hard look at the financial autopilot you might be on right now and ask yourself who your daily financial habits are really serving. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today, and I really hope this fresh perspective leaves you curious to learn even more about taking total control of your financial future.